Hey everyone, thanks for joining me again for another episode of the podcast that asks you what's spinning. I hope you guys are spinning some good tunes out there, some things that make you feel good or, bring about whatever emotion you're hoping to find. I have been listening to the album I Am an Elastic Firecracker by the band Tripping Daisy. If you're not familiar with Tripping Daisy, they formed in the Dallas, Texas area in the early 90s. I Am an Elastic Firecracker came out, I believe, in 95, 96. It's not my favorite of their albums. It is really good. My favorite would be Bill, but Bill's a smaller release that was kind of released just in the Dallas area. I Am an Elastic Firecracker was their first major album release on Island Records. I believe Island then re-released Bill on CD, but it is not available on vinyl, which is very sad to me. But I Am an Elastic Firecracker is a good supplement. A lot of good songs on there. They had a really big radio song called I Got a Girl, and that song is from this album. If you look them up on Discogs, it says that Tripping Daisy disbanded in 1999. However, they do still play shows. In fact, they're playing together in April in Dallas, and I'm thinking really hard about going to that show. Another one of my favorites, the Toadies, will also be playing that show, so that just makes it doubly good. More about Tripping Daisy, they were started by frontman Tim DeLauder, who some of you may or may not know from the Polyphonic Spree. He also had another band called Preteen Zenith. So he's kind of all around doing some weird stuff. Tripping Daisy sometimes is called neo-psychedelic pop rock. Polyphonic Spree, they're kind of, I guess it's described as chorus rock, but they're a very large group. And then Preteen Zenith is, I had some of their stuff as well. It's kind of more along just the alternative, spacey kind of rock sound. Alright, so today on the podcast, I've got a recorded discussion between me and a friend, Will Turner. Will and I normally get together and have a few beers and start talking about music, so I thought that'd be fun to have him come on the podcast and discuss an album with me. No beers were involved in this episode, although that would have been a great idea. I believe I may have mentioned when we first started going with this podcast that I thought it'd be fun to occasionally have people come on and discuss albums that maybe I wasn't familiar with, and to let their passion come out and talk about why they love that album. I think that's something you'll definitely hear come across from Will in this discussion, but something else that came across was the emotions you can get from listening to music, or even better, the emotions you might be feeling that make you listen to the music. Something else that Will mentioned was that sometimes he might not even be feeling that emotion, but that listening to the music might kind of bring about those emotions, and that maybe he's trying to achieve certain emotions sometimes. So I thought that was a good illustration of kind of why we love music and what music can do for us and for our soul. I do want to issue a quick apology for the sound quality of this discussion. It was our first dive into using a 2-microphone setup, and the room wasn't exactly ready for it, so I think you might notice on Will's part of the dialogue that it's kind of an echoey sound. So we'll get that tightened up, and future discussions will be a lot better, a lot cleaner, and a lot clearer. All right, so here it is. This is Will talking about The Gilded Palace of Sin by the Flying Burrito Brothers, and I hope you enjoy. All right, so today I've got Will here, and Will is going to tell us about the Flying Burrito Brothers album, The Gilded Palace of Sin. He's going to tell us kind of why he likes it and some of the history of the band, and I think he's done a lot of research on that, so that ought to be helpful. So, how you doing today, Will?
I'm doing pretty good. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so why do you think this album is something that is definitely people should add to their collection? What kind of does it for you about it?
Well, I mean, I think it's you can certainly think of exceptions, but I think it's considered the very first of what we today would call alt country. It's really one of the it was at least the first real attempt to fuse rock and roll and country music as one sound, instead, whereas previously there had been Nashville country and there had been maybe rockabilly, but this was the first straight up rock and roll album that uses, pedal steel guitar and stuff. And when I say first, I'm sure there's some other exception, but this was like considered the first,
Yeah. So kind of, I guess this was kind of an evolution from the Byrds, kind of flowing into this, and
right. The Byrds, when they first came out, were more known for a pop rock sound and their harmonies and Turn, Turn, Turn and Mr. Tambourine Man.
Right.
And David Crosby left the band, and they had to fill his spot. And so they brought in Gram Parsons, who they had just met. And basically just some kid, walking around Hollywood Boulevard or whatever. Like, nobody knew who he was, but he somehow finagled his way into the Byrds, who are a well-established act by then. They had 5 or 6 albums and many hits. And they recorded Sweetheart of the Rodeo, which was, in many ways, a lot of the things I just said the next album was,
right.
But it didn't have the pedal steel sound. You can think of the Beatles doing What Goes On. There's some early attempts at rock and roll and country. But this was a full-on a rock band doing nothing but country songs for an entire album. They went to Nashville and actually played the Grand Ole Opry, which got booed the entire time. These redneck people in the audience were not there to hear what they called long hairs, even though they cut their hair for the appearance. Anyway, the album was the lowest selling Byrds album to that point, but it went on to its own legendary status and so on. And but at that point, Gram Parsons and Chris Hillman from the Byrds, they both left for different reasons about the same time, and the Byrds went on doing their own thing, but they got together and they started the Flying Burrito Brothers, which, when I say they started, they weren't the first band called that. Gram Parsons just blatantly took some other band. They were concentrating on the West Coast. There was a band on the East Coast that he had been friends with called the Flying Burrito Brothers, and he just used their name, like, whatever. So they started writing some songs, and they had a house they called Burrito Manor, and it was in the Hollywood Hills. I'm imagining it was a dive, like
right.
Same picture, but I doubt it was a manor. Anyway, so what made this different than the Sweetheart of the Rodeo album was they met a guy named Sneaky Pete Kleino. Sneaky Pete played pedal steel guitar, just like you would hear in an old Hank Williams song, right, or in like Hawaiian hula music or whatever. But what he did that nobody had done before, and not very many people since, is he took a regular pedal steel guitar and ran it through every kind of fuzz amp you can think of to
awesome.
Get the weirdest sounds. And some interesting thing about Sneaky Pete, though, is he was really into making creative sounds, and he actually made a lot of the sounds that were used in Empire Strikes Back.
Oh, cool.
So that's there's some people that probably know exactly who he is. I have no familiarity with his music career, but you get the rock band playing country music, and then you get Sneaky Pete coming in playing these just bizarre sounds on the pedal steel guitar. That it doesn't sound country, it doesn't sound rock, it kind of sounds like a spaceship. That just really, it changed the game. Not overnight, like a good analogy is, they say about the Velvet Underground that they only sold 10,000 albums, but all 10,000 of those people started a band. It was kind of that deal. Like it was a big underground hit, but it certainly nobody made any money off of it.
Right. And so this first album, Gilded Palace of Sin, I guess it really kind of got things going. And I wasn't as familiar with it until you had started talking about it, and I went back and listened to it. I'd heard the second album after that where it has Wild Horses on it, which that was impressive to me. Thought it sounds just like the Stones version, but without Mick Jagger singing it, and I liked it better.
Well, that's interesting. I've heard a lot of people not like it. Flying Burrito Brothers actually came out with it first.
Right.
It was written by Mick Jagger and Keith Richards, but they gave it to Gram to let Sneaky Pete record some of his crazy pedal steel all over it, and Gram kind of just kept the song and put it out. So the original intention was for the Rolling Stones to have more of a Flying Burrito sound on their version.
Yeah, and they kind of beat them to it by getting it out a little earlier.
Yeah, and that's actually where Gram's involvement with the band ended. He did 2 albums with them, and became really good friends with Keith, and he eventually just decided he was way more into that scene, and he and drugs, and or both. And so eventually Chris Hillman fired him.
Yeah.
And that's when they brought in Rick Roberts, who helped him record what I call the Blue Album. And then their history just gets absolutely crazier from there. And they're still a band to this day, but like none of the people like even knew the original members.
Right.
I think like their current pedal steel guitarist like checked Sneaky Pete's mail when he was out of town as the relation. I don't know. So
that's awesome. So yeah, let's focus more on this first album and kind of talk about some of the things that are distinct about it and what really stands out to you about it.
So a little about me personally is the first time I heard the album, I bought it as an anthology. You can buy it. It's called the Hot Burritos Anthology. It's their first 3 albums plus any B-sides or miscellaneous album or songs they may have done. And so for me, I listened to that over and over and over but I never really understood until much later where one album starts and stops and so on. To me, it was just all a bunch of collection of songs. So I have to stop and remember what the first 10 songs on the album are. Okay, so it starts off with track which is called Christine's Tune, and I don't know who Christine is, but obviously she wasn't a very nice girl. It really gives you just a right up front example of what I'm talking about. You hear the acoustic guitar come in, and then you hear the drums come in, and the bass comes in, and then all of a sudden the pedal steel kind of just whops you over the head, and this is different than anything I've heard. And then the harmonies come in, and then you hear these guys were obviously in the Byrds, but it's definitely got more of a, I wouldn't call it twang, but it's definitely more of a country feel. So It's almost country without the twang, I think, that song more than any gives you an idea right up front what their sound's about. And to me, it's one of my favorite things to hear, so I don't understand why it wasn't bigger at the time. I mean, I think part of it is the record company tried to market it towards a country audience, and they didn't want to hear it. And the rock and roll people didn't want to hear it because it didn't really fit in either one.
Just the experimentation at the time wasn't really hitting it with a particular audience.
Yeah, and then you see today like bands that they influence like Wilco or other band Counting Crows.
Mm-hmm.
You hear they're having radio hits with that same sound. So then the next up is Sin City, which. What town would you think that was about? It's not about Las Vegas. It's about Washington, D.C. The entire thing is, it came out in 1969, right after all the stuff that happened in 1968. So it's a very political song, and it's mostly about the death of Robert Kennedy. And it's got a very religious feel, and because in addition to rock and country, there's also a lot of gospel.
I kind of got that feel too.
Gram Parsons grew up in rural Georgia, so he played the music he was exposed to. So, and then there's actually 2 soul covers right after that. "Do Right Woman," which was originally I think by Aretha Franklin, but hearing it, it's a feminist anthem. And hearing 2 dudes in 1969 singing it is really interesting. Nowadays I don't think that'd be as wow. Back then that's kind of shocking. And then "Dark End of the Street" was written by a guy named Dan Penn.
Uh-huh.
He wrote a bunch of songs that you've heard of, but I can't think of any of them.
Yeah.
And
kind of those hit machines back in the day.
Yeah. And then it comes in with "My Uncle," which is again it's an anti-draft song. The whole point is I'm gonna go guard Canada, So it's the refrain is I'm moving to the nearest foreign border.
Right.
So and it's just an anti-Vietnam. This is crap song.
Yeah.
Even in 1969, that was still a little ahead, just because I think people didn't really turn against all of that until 70, 71.
Yeah. At least publicly.
Yes. Yeah. And then the next side, I think, starts with "Wheels," which I think might be one of my favorite songs. It's got a line in the song that I think when Gram Parsons wrote it might have been kind of a throwaway line, but because of the way technology has changed, I think it's like an awesome line now.
Yeah.
And the line is, "We've got telephones to say what we can't say." And like back then, the telephone was a thing on your wall in the kitchen, but now, it's people are texting stuff they'd never say to somebody. So.
Yeah. I liked that. That song stood out in my list of things that I kind of made notes about, and that I liked that there were horns on that one that kind of stood out to me.
I don't think those are horns. I think that's the pedal.
Is it?
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the.
That's cool. Yeah, I liked that sound that came through, and I was like, oh, that's different.
Yeah. And then you get the next two, which actually weren't written by Gram Parsons, but I think Chris Hillman has said that he thinks that the next two they kind of go together, are the best vocals that Gram ever did. And they were written by the bass player, Chris Etheridge, who we haven't talked about yet. And Chris Etheridge, you might notice on the album, there's a lot of weird bass lines on that, and he kind of was a nut. I mean, his bass lines don't make any sense. He mostly did a bunch of session work and wasn't actually... He probably played on a bunch of songs you've heard, but not by him or getting any credit or whatever. But it's Hot Burrito number 1 and Hot Burrito number 2. And I've never really understood if the songs are about the same woman or if they're about two different women, because I could hear it both ways. There's also on a later album a Hot Burrito number 3, which is more of a parody of the first two.
Yeah.
And it's silly. It's kind of like when they go back and make sequels to old Disney movies.
Yeah.
And you're like, why would you do that? That's what Hot Burrito number 3 is. But 1 and 2 are just... they go together, so you listen to them both at the same time. You've never listened to just one of them. Although, if you go to find any live albums, I know that I've never found a live recording of number 1.
Oh, really?
Number 2, every concert album is on every concert album, and there's actually an awesome Dinosaur Jr. cover of it.
Oh, very cool. Yeah, what I thought was interesting is, if you're just looking at a track listing, right, you see something just labeled Hot Burrito number 1, Hot Burrito number 2, and you're like, oh, this is probably just some filler stuff, right? Then you get to them, and they're like legit songs, and so I was kind of like, why didn't they bother putting a real name on there or something?
My theory, if you're just asking me, I don't have any proof of this, is I think the name of the band maybe came from those two.
Yeah.
I think those were the first 2 songs written, and then they just never went back and titled them.
Yeah, that makes sense.
There's some like obscure rarity versions where I've seen number 1 labeled "I'm Your Toy," which is the chorus, and then number 10, "Do You Know How It Feels?" I believe is a cover as well. It's got some honky tonk piano on it. And it's pretty straightforward country music, but it's Graham sings it with a passion that like in a way you can just always tell he's hurt, even if he's not trying to be. And then the last song on the album is Hippie Boy, which I wanted to say it was about Emmett Till, but I don't think it is, because I don't think the timing works out. But it's a similar situation where somebody got killed over something horrible. So, but that's what closes it down. I think it's kind of a weak ending to the. I mean, it's a good story, but it's not really something you want to hear again.
Right.
A lot of talking songs are like that. Like you think they're brilliant, but you just want to hear them the one time.
Yeah. So. And you said, as far as your favorite, you think Wheels would be your favorite, or did I hear that wrong?
I would say either Wheels or Juanito, which I actually skipped over. It's just a great song. I think lyrically, the whole album it really speaks to me.
Yeah.
I mean, it's no matter what mood I'm in, I might not actually be hurting over something, but if I'm just in that mood where I want to feel like I was,
sure.
It's a great album for that. But then just the musicianship on the album is as good as it is silly. You know? I mean, they're not trying to be funny, but you would definitely call some of the sounds you hear on the album silly.
Yeah.
But it kind of they make it work.
Yeah, I like that it's kind of a difference from people go into the studio and they're so focused on, okay, we're going to just crank out this album, and and so I think that some of that silliness at least is kind of them just having fun being musicians, which is sometimes you don't get to hear. Mm-hmm. So I think that's good that comes through. Yeah, I made some notes, like songs that I really enjoyed listening to when I was listening to it this last time was I really like what they did with Dark Into the Street. And then the song after that, My Uncle, I think that one was probably my favorite, just in kind of giving a listen to, because I kind of like just kind of the chorus to it and how everything kind of flows with that one.
Yeah, I would add that the first 3 albums are all worth hearing.
Yeah, and
then after that, you really need to be a collector to go past that, because it's not the same people. It's not even the people who replace this. It's replacements of replacements of replacements, which I find fascinating, like from a story standpoint, but it doesn't make for great albums. Yeah,
it is kind of interesting that they would just keep something going. It's almost like a Grateful Dead feel, like where the band's just always out there doing stuff.
Yeah.
Not that they're just replacing members on and on and on, but I did see that the second one they're putting a new release out of that sometime soon.
It's called Burrito Deluxe.
Yeah.
And it's not as strong, I would say, of the first 3 albums. It's by that point, Gram had been lost to drugs.
Yeah.
And,
It's pretty common for the time.
according to Chris Hillman, basically, you end up with a situation where they just couldn't get the same writing magic. I mean, the whole first album, they probably did that in like a week.
Yeah.
They sat up in Burrito Manor smoking weed and doing whatever. And I think by the second album, it was, getting him to come to the studio on time was enough. And so and then the third album, you feel like you can't talk about just the first. I mean, I feel like the first three are, but again, maybe that's my bias.
Well, yeah, especially your introduction to it being all three of them together.
But the third album is much more refocused, but it's a way different sound, and it basically sounds exactly like the Eagles, but about 2 years before they did it.
Right.
And which is interesting because the guitarist on it is Bernie Leadon, who started the Eagles with Glenn Frey.
And was he in on the first album as well?
No, he's only on the second.
Only
one.
Okay, all right.
They kind of had to. Graham would show up just too messed up to play, and so they kind of needed another guitarist to be able to cover for it.
Right.
But then you end up with a situation of 3 songwriters in one band, and there wasn't room for it.
Yeah.
And they weren't making money doing it, and he got that opportunity to play with Linda Ronstadt, which turned into the Eagles.
Right.
So. But yeah, the Blue album, the third one, is much more mellow. I actually just did pick that one up on vinyl, and it's a much more mellow, easy feeling album. There's some silliness with the pedal steel, but it's more, by that point, country rock was actually a thing.
Right.
And it sounds, I don't want to say it's derivative of themselves, but it's more where country rock had evolved to by the early mid-'70s.
Yeah, that's cool. I definitely want to check that one out after hearing you talk about it, because I didn't even know the third one was something that people were looking into or listening to. So that's good. So yeah, it's good to hear about one of these albums that shows up on, like the Rolling Stone Top 500 Greatest Albums, and you hear people talk about from time to time. And so I think it's good to get out there why someone like you really enjoys it, why you like it, and maybe someone will try to give it a try after that and pick it up. So that's cool. Thanks for giving all that info about the band and about the album.
Definitely.
Take it home right away. You got 3 years to pay.
I hope you enjoyed that segment. I think Will and I will be doing a few more discussions in the future. And as I mentioned, we'll get that audio dialed in next time. Toward the end of that segment, you heard me mention the Rolling Stone 500 Greatest Albums list. As this show is still getting off the ground, I'm picking items from that list because if you're at all like me, there are a few albums on the list that you might be a little familiar with, but you haven't stopped to think about what makes it a great album. So that's what we're attempting to answer here. If you're wondering where albums we've done so far have landed on that list of 500, our first one, Rumors by Fleetwood Mac, was number 25. Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers' Damn the Torpedoes was number 313. AC/DC Back in Black was number 73. Def Leppard's Pyromania was 384. And today's album, The Gilded Palace of Sin by the Flying Burrito Brothers, ranks 192. I've got another list I might pull from time to time, and it's called the Top 1001 Albums You Must Hear Before You Die. Naturally, there are albums that are on both lists, but it gives us a pretty large list to pick and choose from. Alright, let's see what we've got new in the collection today. I haven't been to a physical record store lately, so shame on me, but I may have picked up a couple of items through the mail. First one I want to share with you is a 2 LP set titled Iconic Performances from the Monterey International Pop Festival. These are, of course, live recordings from the festival that took place over 3 days in June of 1967 in Monterey, California. The festival was a big moment in music as it was the first American appearance for the Jimi Hendrix Experience and The Who. It was also the first large-scale performance for Janis Joplin, and it introduced Otis Redding to a mass audience. They originally released this 2 LP set last April for Record Store Day, but I was not lucky enough to get my hands on one of those copies. So I was patient and waited, and it was released to a larger audience this last Friday. That would be February 1st. I wanted to add this album to my collection for the music, of course, but also for the great visual appeal of the cover and sleeve. The whole thing is a gold foil look with the festival artwork nicely centered on the front, with that great 60s font listing the dates of the festival across the top and the festival name across the bottom. I haven't yet opened it, but the album is pressed on clear vinyl, so that's a nice touch as well. I know there's purists out there who refuse to listen to anything that isn't on the standard black vinyl, but I've got quite a few recent colored vinyl releases, and the sound quality on all of them is great. Even though this is a 2 LP release, you're not going to get more than one song per artist because there's so many great artists to squeeze in. This isn't everyone on it, but you get a track from Buffalo Springfield, the Butterfield Blues Band, the Grateful Dead, Simon and Garfunkel, Jefferson Airplane, Big Brother and the Holding Company with Janis Joplin, of course, The Who, Otis Redding, the Jimi Hendrix Experience, and the Mamas and Papas. I mean, it's just a tremendous grouping of artists. Like I said, I haven't opened this one up yet, but I can't wait until I do. The only other one to share today is another one from the recent Rhino series, Start Your Ear Off Right. I feel like I've mentioned this series on every episode so far, and I swear this will be the last time, but they had a re-release of Aretha Franklin's compilation titled Aretha's Gold. It's pressed on gold vinyl and has 14 of the late Queen of Soul's classic songs. When I say classic, I mean classic. There's no Who's Zoomin' Who or Freeway of Love on this album. This one was originally released in 1969, and it includes all her hits that were recorded from 66 through 68. All right, well, that's all for this edition of What's Spinning. Don't forget to check us out using the screen name @SpinningPodcast on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Keep those records spinning, have a great week, and we'll talk to you later.